If this is a cost of living election, the ever-rising cost of putting a roof over your head is at the heart of the debate. Both parties have pledged billions of dollars to solve the problem, with the bulk of the money aimed at first home buyers. Experts want to know where the money's coming from, while others point out tax deductions and handouts will inflate the housing market. Tonight we're in Berwick, in the electorate of Bruce, in the outer eastern suburbs of Melbourne, to find out what voters really think about the respective parties' policies. On our panel tonight, the independent MP for Warringah, Zali Steggall, the Deputy Mayor of Melbourne, Rashina Campbell, Claire O'Neill is the Labor Minister for Housing and Homelessness. Michael Sukkar is the Shadow Minister for Social Services, NDIS, Housing and Homelessness, and the Executive Director of the Australia Institute, Richard Dennis. Welcome to Q&A. Hello, I'm Patricia Carvelis. I want to acknowledge that we're broadcasting from the lands of the Bunurong people, and you can watch the program on ABC iView or stream it on YouTube. You can also follow along with the live blog on the ABC News online. Our first question tonight comes from Lyndall Fockins. Hi, Lyndall.
Good evening. Both major parties' proposed housing policies for first home buyers seem fraught with risk. Instead of driving up rates of home ownership, won't they just result in higher home prices?
Claire.
Well, thanks for your question, Lyndall, and I'm really grateful to you for being here tonight. Maybe I'll just give you a little bit of context. We've got a housing crisis in our country that's been 40 years in the making, and our government, in its first term, has built the boldest and most ambitious housing agenda that a Commonwealth government has had since the post-war period. So 3 big pieces: we're building more homes, we're helping renters get a better deal, and we're supporting more Australians into home ownership. So the policies that you're referring to there are things that Prime Minister Albanese announced yesterday, and they are that a new Albanese government, a second-term Albanese government, would make 2 groundbreaking reforms for first home buyers. The first is we'd offer every first home buyer in the country the opportunity to get in with a 5% deposit, and the second is that our government is going to do something that the Commonwealth has never really done before, which is work with the states and territories to build 100,000 homes exclusively for first home buyers, making sure that they get that clean shot. Now, why I don't agree with the characterisation that you've made there, very respectfully, and for 2 reasons. The policies that were announced yesterday are part of what is a massive housing agenda. Our government is the first, really since the post-war period, to say that we are going to tackle the housing crisis head-on. We're investing $43 billion in trying to do that, and the majority of that money is going to build new homes, because that is the ultimate answer to the housing woes that we're experiencing.
So it won't lead to higher house prices, that's the question.
Well, that's not the advice that the government has.
But you said it would be minimal, there'd be an increase?
Yeah, so the advice is that this will not have any significant impact on house prices around the country. The reason that it won't is because we have a real and genuine plan to build more homes around the country. So the housing market, like any other market, is driven by supply and demand. If you do meaningful things to help first home buyers get better access to housing, you need to couple that with an increase in housing supply, and that's exactly what our government is doing. Okay. So I can talk a little bit more about that, but why don't I leave it there?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions to come to. Michael Sukkar, will your policies announced yesterday drive up house prices?
Well, Lyndall, I'll get to that. I think if you listen to Claire, you'd think we're living in some utopian age of housing. The housing crisis is worse than it's ever been. On every single metric, we've gone backwards under this government. We're building fewer homes, not, as Claire has said, we're not building more homes, we're building fewer homes. There are fewer first home buyers, there are fewer approvals, there are fewer starts. So on virtually every metric we've gone backwards, and we think that requires an unprecedented response. We don't think, Peter Dutton, myself, the Coalition, we just don't think we can have a generation of Australians staring down the barrel of the prospect of never owning a home. That would radically transform our society in ways that I don't think any of us want to accept, and that requires really significant changes. So we announced yesterday the most significant change to our tax system in supporting first home buyers, a first home buyer mortgage deductibility measure, which for an average couple on average full-time wages would provide them $55,000 in tax concessions over 5 years that they could use towards paying down their mortgages. Importantly, though, to make sure it doesn't push up prices, we've said it would be confined to people who buy new homes, whether that's a new apartment, a new townhouse, or a new house, because that will ultimately add to the housing stock in this country.
Okay,
we are building
Lyndall's
fewer
question
homes, and
is
that's
about
part
house
of the
prices.
Sure.
Will it lead to an increase in house prices?
No, because our measure is specifically designed to add stock. So the HIA has said that our first home buyer mortgage deductibility measure, in their estimation, will increase the number of homes built each year by 30,000. Why? It's not commonly known in this country, but homes are only built here if someone's willing to pre-commit. An off-the-plan apartment purchase, someone putting down a deposit for a house and land package. If someone doesn't pre-commit, the house never gets built. Through our measure providing a huge tax concession to first home buyers, it's going to drive first home buyers, rather than fighting it out for the existing stock, to actually go out and buy that new apartment, new townhouse or new home. And in that way, it won't drive up prices.
I'm going to have to interrupt a bit. Lyndall's question is about the house prices. You both say your policies announced over the weekend at your launches won't increase house prices. Ali Steggall, do you think of it that way?
Lyndall, thank you for the question. Well, I think there's some right and wrong in what both are saying. Most experts have come out with concerns that it will drive up house prices, both policies, because it's assisting. My concern is we're picking and choosing who gets help. So, for example, the coalition policy of only being new builds, I have a concern, why is it only new builds? I know it's to boost that supply. But, for example, in areas, it means basically new homeowners can only go to the fringe, to the new suburbs. They can't buy within existing areas.
There are apartments in every
why are
suburb
we
in the country.
restricting it to that? So you're creating a two-tier class of first home buyers in terms of who can buy an existing home to renovate it versus just a new build. So I have issues with that from the cost of and the prioritisation. I think the supply piece of the government's proposal is important. We have to build new homes. What I'm concerned about, I'm not hearing from anyone, is the quality of what we're going to build. Is it going to be climate resilient? Is it going to be energy efficient? Because the cheapest home is a home you only build once. It's not the one you have to rebuild. So I haven't heard once in anyone's announcements, included in this is the quality of the homes that we're going to be building.
Well, yes, no answer. Is that included in your policies?
Well, we have a focus on getting roofs over people's heads. I mean, that's what the focus
But these other things, will you build it in?
The focus, if we're supporting people to purchase new homes, which this policy does, the quality of those homes will be absolutely up to the standards
Claire,
that
quick
we
answer from you.
impose on those.
Well, the answer is yes, because the National Construction Code has extremely high requirements for new builds. So the 100,000 homes that we build will be compliant with those requirements. Can I just add a little bit? Sorry, Zali, just really recognise your point. And I think for the context for the discussion today, the real thing we need to do as a country is build more homes more quickly. That's the problem that's 40 years in the making here. It's not just the 100,000 homes that our government's building. We're building 55,000 social and affordable homes and working with the states to build 1.2 million over the coming 5 years. So these are really big, substantial things, and again, not something the Commonwealth's done since the post-war period.
Okay, our next question comes from Georgia Haysom. Hi, Georgia.
Hi. As a 25-year-old full-time teacher, I'm doing everything right, working hard, saving where I can, and trying to get ahead. But even with a stable job, I'm finding it near impossible to break into the housing market. How can young Australians like me hope to own a home when wages haven't kept up with the cost of living? Well,
Richard, this is a very common story. Georgia, you've spoken for your generation. Richard, are the policies going to answer that question?
No, they're not. Thanks, Georgia. And I'm sorry that you're in that situation, and I'm sorry that in the middle of an election campaign, we're not actually talking about how to fix that for you and so many people like you. Let's be clear. 10 years ago, Joe Hockey said, if you can't afford a house, go and get a better job. Go and get a better job. Well, we did the numbers on this recently, and if you'd have taken his advice at the time 10 years ago and you had an average full-time wage job, and for the last 10 years you'd be saving, you'd be $1,000 further away from a deposit on an average house in Sydney today. Having saved for 10 years, you'd be $1,000 further away from the deposit because house prices are rising faster than incomes. This is not complicated. As long as house prices are rising faster than wages, you can't catch up. And I'm sorry, but it's a cruel hoax for people to tell you that a tax break here or something or other there is going to help.
So just let me get some clarity. I mean, obviously Georgia's really stressed about her own situation. Are you saying neither of the major parties' policies will substantially help people like Georgia?
No, because imagine you're at an auction and you went to everyone at the auction and you gave everyone $10,000. The only person you've helped is the person selling the house. So this auction where we're giving cash to people, whether it's everybody, whether it's investors through the capital gains tax breaks, whether it's some first homeowners buying some first houses, when we go to auctions and we give some people a bit of cash, we make them feel great. All right, but you're just changing who misses out at the auction. House prices in Australia have risen so much faster than incomes that a whole generation's been left behind.
So let me bring in Rashina if I can. How common is Georgia's problem across the country, and do you see real solutions?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, Georgia, I think your problem is all too common, and I'm sorry that that is the experience of you and your generation, for that matter, my generation. I scrape into being a millennial, and I know that voters of my generation and voters younger than us have the deep despair that we are not going to have it as good as our parents did. And I think that is a crisis in this nation. It's a crisis of lack of hope. So I'm not surprised that this has become a housing policy election. That is the right thing. I do think there is some hope in the election discussion to date. For example, the ability for a first home buyer to access their super and then have reduced serviceability by tax deducting their loan repayments. I do think that offers some hope. But the most important thing, and the thing that terrifies me, is when you look at policies like this, what are they going to do to a market that is already very distorted? Construction costs have risen by about 30% since COVID. That is driving up the cost of buying that first home. And I do worry that if the government's going to build 100,000 homes, we saw what happened to construction costs when the Victorian government spent as much as it did on the big build. That meant construction was more expensive for people who wanted to buy or renovate a home. If you've got the government building homes, what happens to everyone else who doesn't get those 100,000 homes? How much is it going to cost them to get on the property ladder?
OK, Georgia, I want to go back to you. You've heard the major parties, and they'll have more to say, of course. Do you feel satisfied that they provide you a pathway to home ownership?
I think there's a few things in terms of, yes, you can access your super, but how does that help you as a young female living on your own? We know that young females usually have less in their super. How's that going to help us in the long run?
So that's not an answer for you? How about whether you could tax deduct a new build? Would you want to do that?
Potentially. I guess we'll have to say.
But again, helping one person helps. It seems to help them. That's the cruel hoax. Right, we can find anyone in the audience and say, imagine we helped someone in your circumstance. Wouldn't you feel special? But we haven't actually helped fix the audience's problem. We're just helping fix one person or one...
But isn't it lots of one people?
We're helping lots of individual people. So, Georgia, you are, in a sense, the target market of our policy suite. So... There are two...
Well, OK, let's not laugh about it. Is it about voters or is it a substantial policy?
No, this is... I mean, look, I have arguments with Claire all the time in Parliament, but I can assure you most of us get up in the morning thinking about how we can maintain home ownership for the next generation of Australians, genuinely. And our policy suite, no party can match our policy suite for someone like you, Georgia. There are two big challenges for people in Georgia's position broadly. It's the deposit hurdle. In Sydney, it takes 12 to 14 years to save for a deposit. In Melbourne, it takes over 10 years. On average, it takes more than 8 years to save for your deposit. So how do you help people with a deposit? And secondly, getting access to finance and being able to service your mortgage is increasingly difficult. Only the Coalition has policies to address both.
OK, I've got to give...
I need to just mention them. So firstly, obviously, access to a portion of your super to help you get into your home. We know on every metric owning a home when you enter retirement means you are infinitely better off than if you don't. The home guarantee scheme, the 5% scheme that Claire mentioned, that's my scheme that I legislated in 2020. It's housing.
Are you backing the widening of it?
That we're supporting, and I'm very happy to support the increase in the numbers of people that can access it, not on the house price caps. And then finally, so that helps with the deposit, 5% deposit and getting access to super. But people in the end actually need to be able to repay their mortgage. That's when I travel around this country, being able to repay the mortgage is the most significant reason why people are not getting finance, why they can't get into that home. That's why we're going to give people, an average couple, $55,000 over. All right,
Claire's turn now, and then I'm going to the next question.
That's the full suite. And the
I'm moving the talking stick to the minister.
I don't think the Labor Party's matched it.
Yeah. Okay, Claire, your turn.
They do.
Georgia, thanks so much. And, you know, I spend a lot of time with young people around the country talking to them about the impact this is having on their lives, and it's genuinely very serious. Like, we've got a 40-year crisis, and literally millions of people today are being seriously affected by it, and I'm sorry that you're one of them. I really genuinely am. So let me just quickly say why I disagree with everything that Michael just said, and then I'll talk to you about what Labor can do for you.
Even on my home guarantee.
So just a couple of things for you.
Surely don't disagree.
Super for housing is the worst thing that we could do for the housing crisis. Like, if I was trying to cook up a way to make it worse for you, that is where I would start. Just let me quickly explain why. If we gave you access to your super but no one else, great, you're going into an auction in a really good position. If we give, so what the Coalition are proposing is that on one day, literally millions of people around the country are all going to get access to $50,000 of their super. So what's going to happen? First, the research tells us prices will immediately rise by around $92,000 on average in our capital cities, like that. Okay. And then the second thing that it's going to do is it's going to take the superannuation savings of your entire generation, you're going to bid against each other in an auction and effectively gift that to the older property owning generation. Like, what a terrible idea.
All right.
So what is Labor going to do for you? We're going to give you the opportunity to get in at 5%, because the biggest problem you've described to us is that you're not able to save for a deposit. You're probably renting and paying off someone else's mortgage, and we want you to pay off your own. So the 5% deposit, and then the underlying problem here is that we need to build more homes around our country. And I know it's hard when you're in housing distress to understand how something as big as how many homes we have in our country matters, but at the end of the day, all the things that are going wrong with housing come back to the fact that we have a housing shortage in our country. And, you know, so Michael sort of said a whole lot of things here. The Liberals did
mortgage deductibility?
The Liberals did nothing about this. Well, let me tell you why I don't agree with mortgage deductibility.
Okay.
No, because let me tell you how what that does to Georgia. That doesn't do a damn thing
A tax cut
for Georgia. No, because she's a renter, mate. She's a renter.
A tax cut.
She's the one who's in distress.
How do we turn renters into owners?
Can I finish a sentence?
How do we turn renters into owners?
Do you mind if I finish a sentence? So Georgia, what the Coalition are saying they're going to do to you is you're probably renting, paying off your the owner of your house's mortgage. What he's trying to do is take your taxpayer dollars and subsidise someone who's already had the opportunity to get into home ownership. That money should go to you. We want you to get into home ownership. That policy that the Coalition cooked up in 24 hours, it's not going to build a single new home around our country, and it is not going to get a single person into home ownership who wasn't already going to get into home ownership. Like, what a waste of money.
Claire either doesn't understand the policy or...
All right, Michael's going to respond on his policy, and then we're going to the next question.
Claire either doesn't understand it or is deliberately misrepresenting it. The tax cut goes to you, Georgia. You get the tax cut. So you get the...
She doesn't have a mortgage, though.
Well, let's just... This is turning renters into owners. We know the Labor Party is very comfortable with having lifelong renters. That's not something we're willing to accept. And so a tax cut to assist people to actually get the opportunity to get a mortgage and own a home is crucially important, in addition to the deposit hurdle that I spoke about. So the deduction of many thousands of dollars does not go to anyone other than you.
Okay.
And so how could a tax cut be anything but bad for the person? It's not a handout from the government. You're just getting to keep a bit more of your own money.
Georgia, you have been campaigned to individually tonight. What a national platform for you. I just want this woman to get a house. As we mentioned, these big pledges cost a lot of money. We asked the former head of the Department of Treasury, Dr. Ken Henry, for his commentary on the election, and that was just before this weekend. Here he is.
Elections are usually fought on short-term cost of living issues. Our politicians, they compete with scare campaigns and band-aid solutions. But when you think about it, most short-term crises are the consequence of long-term policy failure. Key ingredients in our cost of living crisis are weak real wages growth, unaffordable housing and high energy costs. And the causes of these have been building for a long time. To avert an intergenerational tragedy, the next Australian government must do three things. First, it must reform the tax system to boost business investment and productivity, to improve housing affordability, and most importantly, to take the burden of balancing the budget off the shoulders of young Australian workers. The second thing it must do is it must put Australia on a more certain and more ambitious carbon abatement trajectory. And then the third thing it must do is to fix our broken nature laws, to prepare the environment and to provide certainty for business investment, including renewable energy projects.
Dr. Ken Henry there. We wanted to include some experts also in this show. There are some big ideas that they would like embraced. Zali, on that issue of, he says it's going to be an intergenerational tragedy, particularly if these tax issues are not resolved.
Well, absolutely, and I think the audience just got a first-hand view of what often happens in Parliament, the fighting between the major parties on these issues. No one even mentioned tax reform in that discussion of how do we balance between first homeowners and families getting into the housing market or renters against the interests of investors, for example, in the property market. No one's willing to touch that hot potato, but clearly Ken Henry is pointing out that reform is going to be needed. We have to have that difficult conversation around reforming that system. The intergenerational debt when it comes to our carbon emissions is huge, right? Not only are young people going to be struggling under very high rents, hard to get into the house ownership, they are also bearing a burden of an ageing population. We currently have about 3.7 people working for every person over 65 that's retired. Our major revenue base is from people's work and the tax you pay. By 2060, it will be 2.7. So that generation will have an even greater burden through the current tax system to pay for the ageing population and all the services. So, and then we know through the degradation of nature and our ever carbon emissions and climate change escalating and accelerating, we lose about 50% of GDP to nature. So huge impact to our productivity, to the cost in the future. So young generations are going to have absolute, the intergenerational burden they have from the failure to act for the last 10 to 20 years is huge.
So Dr. Henry raises these issues. Richard, they're clearly not the main issues of this campaign. Is that reasonable?
Oh, well, it's reasonable, but it's not good. I mean, let's be clear. Like, I'm an economist, so apologies. The only thing
to apologise first, yeah.
The only thing that seemed to bore people more than talking about budgets is talking about tax reform. But let me make it exciting for you. Australia's one of the richest countries in the world. We're the third biggest fossil fuel exporter in the world. And in Saudi Arabia, when the price of oil goes up, they feel rich. And in Qatar, when the price of gas goes up, they feel rich. But we've so cooked our tax system that in Australia, the third biggest fossil fuel exporter in the world, when the price of oil and gas and coal go up, we feel poor. We call it an energy crisis. We call it a cost of living crisis. Now, in Norway, which is also a big fossil fuel exporter, they tax their fossil fuel industry and give their kids free university education. In Australia, we subsidise... But get this, in Australia, we subsidise the fossil fuel industry. We give more than half of the gas we export away for free, and we charge our kids a fortune to go to uni. Tell me politics is boring. Tell me budgets are boring.
All right.
When we elect people, when they form budgets, they're the big choices that we get to make. We're choosing to be poor. We're choosing to have expensive childcare, expensive health, expensive education. Other countries tax their fossil fuel industry.
I'm going to bring in Rashina. Some of those questions were also about the tax burden on young people. That's not That's not on the ballot in this election.
No, it's not. And we do need to start having those big discussions as a country, both about tax reform, but also the sort of economy we want to have. You know, there's been discussions about the things that we dig up in this country. What about the things that build on our strengths into the future? So Melbourne is a knowledge city. We are perfectly primed to grow the sorts of industries that mean all of our kids and grandkids are going to have jobs where they're not talking about low wage growth. They are going to be some of the highest earners in the world if we play it right. Things like biomed, even energy, those tech sectors. We already have the bones in that. And I would love to see every level of government, the feds, but also the state government, turning their mind to that long-term picture. We've talked about some pretty expensive policies today. It's those same voters, those younger voters who are going to be paying for those policies in the future. Let's grow our revenue base and our economy as a nation so we can get some hope back about the future of this country.
OK, Ken Henry says big reforms. Why aren't they on the ballot? Briefly.
Well, I don't agree with Ken Henry, actually. I usually do, but not on this occasion. I actually think we're talking about some really big and important things this election. I mean, can I just make the point? We've had a housing crisis building in our country for 40 years, and finally we're having an election, much as I disagree with almost everything that Michael says about housing. At least we're talking about it. At least we've got a competition here about who's going to actually put their shoulder to the wheel and have a go at this. So I think there's been a few things written about how this election's all about things that, you know, don't matter perhaps.
Well, it's a spend-a-thon, and both of you have been on a bit of a spend-a-thon. Both of you, haven't you?
Well, I wouldn't call investing in new homes for Australians a spend-a-thon. We're investing in trying to help people build a future for themselves and their families. I think it's really denigrating to call things that are important legacies spend-a-thons. You know, building social and affordable housing is an important investment.
OK, well, we're in deficit, and you're spending a lot, aren't you, Michael?
Well, I'd say this. We do have an over-reliance on personal income tax in this country, and that undoubtedly is going to, as Zali alluded to, going to hit younger people more. That was one of the reasons why we were really enthusiastic about our first home buyer mortgage deductibility, because it is pretty well targeted at younger Australians who are going to be the beneficiaries of that tax.
Why not just systemically cut their tax?
But at a systemic level too, absolutely. I think the over-reliance on personal income tax undoubtedly hurts younger Australians more. I disagree with Richard to a degree. I mean, some of our biggest taxpayers in this country are the mining companies who literally do pay for the... Well, it's true.
Not the gas industry.
No, I'm talking about, you know... BHP.
I was talking about gas.
Well, BHP Billiton would be one of our biggest taxpayers.
And I was talking about gas, not BHP.
OK, well, I thought you were talking about miners in...
No, I said gas.
Gas industry?
So the point I would make, though, is this election, I think, finally, we've got to speaking about what I think is going to be the challenge for governments into the future, and that is home ownership. We haven't heard much from the government with home ownership this term. Claire, to her credit, she puts out a whole lot of very aspirational targets. She's spoken tonight about 1.2 million homes. She fails to mention that the industry believes that they're falling 400,000 short, which would mean we build fewer homes over the next 5 years than we built in the last 5 years.
All right.
The Housing Australia Future Fund, the Housing Australia Future Fund...
I'm going to wind you up so I can get to our next question.
...has not built a single home.
All right. Our next question is from Steve Whittington. Hi, Steve.
Good evening, panel. Since the last federal election, my mortgage repayments have gone up by 16%. My electricity bill by 12%. My council rates 20%. My grocery bill 17%. My private health cover 32%. All of this despite continually shopping around and using comparison sites to source the best deals. In the same period, my salary increased by only 7%. It doesn't take a mathematical genius or an economist, Richard, to see that I've gone backwards in real terms in only 3 years. What are the parties doing to rein in spiralling costs and boost wages for middle-income families?
Steve, great question. I'm going to keep you standing. And Steve, you've got a lot of fans in the room. I mean, how many people have a similar story there to Steve? Put your hand up. Whoa, OK, it's a lot of hands. So this is a common story in our country and a common story in this electorate, which is an electorate that's being hard fought over. Steve, what could they do that would change your situation?
as a homeowner, and I appreciate I'm fortunate compared to a lot of people we're talking about, people are fixated on the price of their homes, the value of their homes always going up. I'm not. Let's try and keep that down. We need to change the tax. We need to have structural tax reform with housing, and we need to do something about wages because we just do not have the bargaining power. I feel powerless negotiating where all the companies on which I'm reliant are putting up their prices by more than inflation every year.
Yeah, that's Steve. Wow. Rashina, you saw all those hands, and Steve's done the maths. It's been pretty incredible. But he wants big reform. We're finding that, can I say, at the ABC now. We're asking voters to get in contact with us. So many people actually do want big reform.
Yeah. So the anxiety that households are experiencing at the moment is crippling. There is no doubt about it. And I do think that requires responses on a number of levels. There have to be short-term responses, immediate cost of living relief. And from what you've said, Steve, about your council rates, I don't think you live in my municipality, so I'm proud of that. But we need all levels of government to take a low taxing approach. In this state, people are being crippled by tax on many levels. And not only is that bad for budgets and bad for households and bad for all of our bottom lines, it means Victoria's lost its swagger. We've lost our confidence. We don't feel we've got that strong long-term trajectory. So I do think we need to have some of that broader thinking. And I wished in this federal election we were having some of that bigger thinking, those big discussions about how are we going to make Australia the next Singapore, attract the best headquarters in our region. So not only do you have a great job and your wages are going up, but you know that is going to be the case for your kids and your grandkids.
Zali, Steve's story is really emblematic of so many.
Absolutely.
But he wants big change.
And some of the other costs you haven't probably referred to is your insurance prices, right? We know insurance has risen by about 30% on average around the country over the last couple of years, over 100 to 150% in other areas. So the picture of all that investment into your home ownership, and then it is at greater risk now of obviously events occurring more and more frequently, and you can't even afford the insurance to protect that asset. We also know council rates are going up because more and more state governments defer costs onto local governments, and then residents end up paying for it through their levies as well as personally in their own situations. So I think there's a really big question of revenue base in Australia that we're not addressing. For example, the government in the last term introduced the petroleum resource rent tax, so again about taxing super profits around the gas industry. On advice from Treasury, they could have gone for a higher taxing threshold. They went for the lowest possible threshold so that the lowest revenue could come back to the Australian people. It means that at the last budget, over the forward estimates, they had to downgrade the estimate of how much revenue would come back to the Australian people. So we have to have the conversation of a greater revenue base so that those costs aren't put on to households. But we have to invest in innovation. We have to have innovation.
We are absolutely having the conversations because you all in this room have overwhelmed us with these questions. So voters are actually speaking. Steve, to get ahead, I've heard that you're actually been thinking of getting a second job. Is that right?
A third job, actually, at the moment. Right. So I've, since the interest rates started going through the roof, I've rented out my house over December and January, and I house sat for friends. I rented my house out over the Grand Prix just to get a bit of extra taxable revenue. And the third job I'm considering doing is Uber driving. In between all those other things.
But that's pretty staggering that you don't feel like your main job can sustain your life.
There's no way. In terms of mortgage affordability, I cannot afford the repayments on my home of 24 years.
Okay, so Claire, no one's policies can really change that, I'm guessing, quickly, right? But this is a common story.
Yeah, and Steve, I'm so sorry that that's happened to you and, you know, a really tough time. And, I mean, you do speak for a lot of people in this room. It has been a really difficult few years on the cost of living. Maybe I can just speak a little bit about the wages issue that you raised and then talk about some of the things that the government's done, not to fix every problem that you've raised there, because I wouldn't pretend that I can do that, but just to relieve some of that pressure. Just on the wages, this is a really big issue for the country over the last 15 years or so, and Richard mentioned this before as a housing affordability affordability issue. We have had a long period in our country of really flat wages growth. Now, the Coalition were in government for a decade and said this is, they called it a deliberate design feature of their economy. My party has a fundamentally different view. We believe that people should get paid properly for the work that they do. And while it has been really difficult, we've just had 5 quarters of positive wages growth, so we're starting to see that moving again. That's not an accident. It's happened because our government's done some really big things on this front. Properly paying our aged care workers, who we all depend on, properly paying our childcare workers, supporting again and again at the Fair Work Commission a pay increase for those on the lowest incomes, because that has a flow-through effect right through the economy. So we're starting to see some pick up there. There's some industrial relations things too that are important, same job, same pay, those sorts of things. Just briefly on the cost of living, just remember a few things here. You know, the tax cuts that went to every household and that top-up tax cut that's in the budget. Again, wouldn't pretend this is fixing everything. I just want you to know we've done everything in the last 3 years that we can. Cheaper childcare, cheaper medicines, the energy bill price relief, $300 that went to you last year, and then $160 coming again going forward. What I would want you to know, you know, we are in an election context here. I want you to know that for all the kind of huffing and puffing that Peter Dutton's done over the last 3 years, almost everything I've just mentioned there, he has opposed us doing. Energy bill price relief, tried to stop you from getting that payment. And that's been the consistent approach. So we're trying to do the right thing here, support your wages growth and assist with the cost of living wherever
Michael
we can.
Sukkar, this story, I mean, that the fact that he has to get a third job potentially, if you count them the way you have, right? Even if the Coalition were to be elected, you can't resolve that, can you? I mean, realistically, what is the offer that resolves that problem?
Steve, there's no doubt your story, which you very eloquently put, is one that's felt by lots and lots of people. We've seen the biggest drop in household income in a generation across the country. We've seen the biggest drop in living standards that we've seen in a generation in the last 3 years. I think that's one of the reasons why people have been so frustrated when Anthony Albanese runs around the country telling people how wonderful they've had it. He promised before the last election to you, Steve, that you would get not an energy increase that you spoke about, but he said you would get a $275 reduction in your power prices per annum. He told you that. He said it on 97 occasions. He made that promise. He's never repeated that promise since. Why? Because energy prices have gone up by $1,300 in that time.
But how would Steve's life be better under a Coalition government?
Well, firstly, since the election of the government, we've seen $425 billion of additional spending, which most economists would say has kept inflation higher for longer and kept your mortgage interest rates therefore higher for longer. Whilst other countries have seen their mortgages come down over the last 18 months, ours stayed stubbornly high because of it. Now, what have we announced this election? Firstly, day one, if we're elected, we will reduce the fuel tax by 25 cents a litre, $14 every time you fill up your tank. We're going to provide a tax offset, a $1,200 cost of living tax offset, the old low and middle income tax offset that we had in place, broadly speaking, when we were in government, which will flow through to people who earn up to $144,000. Those are a couple of practical ways. But in the long run, what do we need to do? We need to ensure that government spending is under control and therefore that taxes are under control. Let me just quickly finish. Here in Victoria, we've seen the example of long-term Labor governments. Their spending goes out of control and then they have to tax. I'm going to
wind you up only because I need, very briefly from you, Richard, I've got to say I need to get to the audience questions. That's why I'm interrupting.
Steve, there's something really simple that could happen tomorrow. The Reserve Bank could meet and cut interest rates. It's the Reserve Bank that told the biggest lie before the last election. The former Reserve Bank governor said rates wouldn't go up until 2025, and then they increased them more than a dozen times. They should have postponed the last meeting until after Donald Trump had his meeting. They should have cut rates the next day. Inflation is already in the target range, and there is no good reason that we've kept rates so high for so long. The Reserve Bank has posed enormous pain on people like
I'm going to get to our next question from Stuart Brown. Hi, Stuart.
How are you going? I'm a local small business owner, and we're doing it tough as well. You talk about putting wages up. Super has also increased 2.5% over the last few years. Our power bills obviously keep growing as well. Power bill relief doesn't stop our rent and our supply costs from climbing. The instant asset write-off still relies on us having cash to actually spend to get any benefit from it, so it's really no benefit at all. When will you stop taking the easy route of making yourselves look good by announcing billions of dollars of policies and running up a bill on the Australian public's afterpay account, and actually tell us when you're going to deliver what will create a sustained real difference to Australia's largest employer, which is small business?
Stuart, wow, what do you... I like how you've called it afterpay, the Australian budget that's in deficit. Good description. What do you do?
So we run tyre and automotive franchises.
Yeah, and how hard has it been? How tough has it been to run the business?
Well, really hard. We've had to put our prices up, I think, 4 or 5 times over the last 12 months just to make ends meet. I know a lot of people probably think that everyone that owns a small business is a multi-millionaire. It's not the case.
I had a hunch.
Yeah, it's not the case. So, you know, we work really hard, and I empathise with people. I own a house, so I'm not in the situation that some of the people in the audience are, but... You know, everyone's carrying on about how billions and billions of dollars are going to be invested in fixing a housing crisis that I think most Australians probably agree neither of you are going to actually fix. So I think every Australian's...
Well, I want to say about that. Put your hand up if you agree with that statement that they're not going to fix the housing crisis. Wow, OK. Well, I think you understand the audience pretty well. You're worried that everything's being put on the... just in credit. That's your issue, though, isn't it?
Yeah, every day someone comes out and spends another $1 billion, like they don't have to pay for it because they don't. We do, and none of it's going to substantially improve the conditions in our country. You might think that it will. It'll get you re-elected, but then 3 years down the track, you'll be doing it all again. OK,
Zali, this is... and I want brief answers on this because I've got great other questions coming up. But, Zali, there's huge issues with how much we're spending.
There is. It was only 3 weeks ago we had the budget and everyone was talking about, you know, fiscal deficit for the next 10 years and we've got to get some budget repair measures in place. Haven't heard anything during the election from the major parties around budget repair. So I think that's a major aspect. But from a small business point of view, I think we have to talk about this. We've had a ping-pong match over this term of government around the instant asset write-off, for example, for small business, where it was done at the very last sitting of Parliament that it was actually finally done for this financial year. That's impossible for a small business to budget, to plan, to actually invest in their machinery or their infrastructure because you don't know for sure you're going to be doing it. So at the very least, at this election, both major parties should be committing to make it a permanent instant asset write-off.
And are we putting...
much greater than...
Are we putting everything on afterpay?
Well, I do think there is an element of providing relief to a generation that needs it, but ultimately that is a bill that they're going to be paying. So I do agree. There has to be some fiscal responsibility. But to your questions, I do think at the end of the day, small business is the backbone of our economy, but small business doesn't feel like government's got its back. And that is undoubtedly the case, particularly in Victoria, where work cover premiums are going through the roof. You look at payroll tax that disincentivises you from growing your business. I do think that is a lens that has been missing both from the federal government and the state government about what can be done to make sure that small business has the confidence to grow again. And that starts with making it easier to do business, cutting those taxes that are particularly targeted at small businesses and which they can least afford to pay right now.
Claire, Stuart's question, he's pretty worried about the government credit card. Is he right to be? And how serious are you about actually paring back some of that spending?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to... I'll talk to the point you made, Stuart, but I think the thing that probably worries me most about your question is just you sound like you just don't have any confidence that the government's trying to work for you and work for citizens and work for the community. And I'm so sorry that you feel that way. I'd love to talk to you after the show and just understand... and just to have that discussion with you. I mean, I think for Michael and I, we're in government, we're engaging in really serious issues that affect everyone in this room every day, and it honestly breaks my heart to talk to citizens who actually believe that we're not trying to do the right thing every day. We have some of the most incredible things in our country that are guaranteed by government. I mean, Medicare, this is the envy of the world that we have in our country, the capacity for people to go to the doctor and get medical care they need for free, an education system where public schools are properly funded. Like, these are the sorts of things that we're dealing with every day. So let me just get to your question about fiscal responsibility. I mean, you'll remember that Michael and his colleagues were elected saying they would deliver a budget surplus each and every year. They didn't deliver a single one. We delivered 2 in the time we've been in government. We've made a $207 billion improvement to the bottom line that's going to save our country $60 billion in interest over the coming decade. We've done that in a few ways, and one of them is reforming the things that are driving the problem with the bottom line. So one of them is aged care, for example, and I just credit Michael and his colleagues for the work they did collaboratively and bipartisanly with our government.
So the question is, because I have to cut this down, and Michael, if you can be brief, just because we've got more questions. Will you do more of those deals, like you did on aged care, looking at areas of reform, whoever wins, Michael, to go, hey, we need to rein in this spending? That's for you, Michael. Bipartisanship for both of you.
Sure. Well, look, I'm the Shadow Minister for the NDIS, and I worked very closely with Bill Shorten on some really important reforms to the NDIS. It would have been quite easy, and it was tempting to politicise it, but it was something that I felt was bigger than party politics at the time, particularly the sustainability of a scheme as important as that. But Stuart, to your question, I think you have a right to feel let down. There's been 29,000 small businesses literally go out of business in the last few years. Here in our home state of Victoria, small businesses have been smashed. And one thing that can help every small business, to go back to an earlier point, is to lower energy costs. That's one way that we can help virtually every single small business. I was speaking to a fish and chip shop owner who said to me, Michael, my electricity bill's gone up by $300. I said, geez, $300 a month, that's a lot. He goes, no, $300 a week. He said, can you imagine how much chips I need to sell to make up $300? That's just in the last couple of years. So these costs that have been imposed on businesses when we were promised that energy costs would come down, I think has disproportionately hit small businesses. And we do work for you because small businesses, you overwhelmingly employ the vast majority of Australians. You're the tax base that funds the sorts of services that Claire's talking about. And I think Zali's point is very well made. The government, we essentially forced the government into passing the legislation on the last day to provide small businesses with the instant asset write-off. Right. That should have been done months ago, but I think suggests that small businesses are really not front of mind of the government.
We're going to get to our next question, which comes from Marge Richmond. Hi, Marge.
Hi, everybody. As a retiree of 10 years, after 50 years in the workforce, my question is this. How can the government expect us to believe that they know everyone is doing it tough when the latest pension increase for a couple equates to 25 cents a day each? Every bill we pay has risen significantly. I find such remarks insulting, to say the very least. Actions definitely speak louder than words in this situation.
Marge, I know that you are really, really fired up about this. Just tell me about that sense of despair you feel. Do you feel like you've been ignored by Canberra?
Yes.
Why?
Well, after 50 years in the workforce and paying tax and bringing my children up and all the costs associated with that, and now as a pensioner expecting to not have an easy life but have a comfortable life, and now we're having to watch the money that's coming in and the huge amounts that are going out.
And how much are you watching it? Just give me a sense of what that is like in your...
Well, just constantly watching and worrying, particularly in winter when the gas bills are coming in, like you've got to turn on, oh, we better not turn it on until 5 or 6 o'clock and we better turn it off at 9 o'clock. You know, it's ridiculous.
Richard.
Well, let's square the circle here. We've just heard Steve worry that we're spending like crazy. We've just heard Marge say we're not spending enough. Now, that's okay. We're one of the richest countries in the world. What we need to do is figure out what our priorities are. Now, the unspeakable truth in Australian politics is that Australia is a low-tax country. According to the pinko lefties at the OECD, Australia would have to collect an extra $100 billion a year, an extra $100 billion per year to become average.
Well, some parts of the community feel high tax.
Absolutely, they do. And this is the beautiful thing about democracy. The gas industry isn't paying any tax. Marge isn't getting enough money. Steve's worried about the deficit. The only way to square this circle is to bring the conversation up a couple of levels.
Well, we've been doing that, I think, here.
Well, but we still need to admit something really simple.
And what is that?
Matthias Cormann's the head of the OECD. Remember him, the Liberal Party finance minister?
Yeah.
The OECD says we're one of the lowest tax countries in the developed world. That's why you're worried that we're spending too much, because we're not collecting nearly enough tax. Last year, the big banks made $18 billion in profit on your mortgage. The average mortgage pays $200,000 in profit over its life to the banks. The supermarkets made an extra $1 billion last year because their profit margins went up. The health insurance companies made record profits last year, but they want to put the premiums up. Now, we live in a rich country. We feel poor. We can either collect more tax from the big businesses that can afford to pay it, or we can say, sorry, Marge, you've had it too good for too long. But we can't pretend to have both.
Okay, well, on another issue, which I think in some ways is adjacent to the issue Marge raised, Labor has also delivered increases to the job seeker allowance, but not nearly enough, according to some. Independent economist Nikki Hutley argues there's economic upside in much bigger job seeker increases.
Australia's statistics on wealth and income inequality make for very sombre reading, and they've been deteriorating in recent years. The lowest 20% of income earners take just 6% of the pie, whilst those at the top 20% take 9 times that amount. And of course, those on job seeker payments are the worst off. They're living well below the poverty line, unable to afford rent in most places, meals, medicines, kids' educational needs. This is not acceptable. New research just last month has shown us that if we invest $1, we will get $1.25 returned back to us. Now, that is a very solid return on investment in terms of healthier people, lower government payments, better productivity. It is a win-win outcome. Indeed, the government's own Economic Inclusion Advisory Committee last month recommended that job seeker be increased to be 90% of the aged pension. The gap between those two has been widening over the last few decades. They want to see it narrowed. When will you act to see this happen and restore dignity to those most in need in Australia?
Brief answers from the two people who could form government.
Well, we've had 2 questions here from people who are on fixed incomes, and that's really important. And I know that things have been really tough for everyone in this audience, but for people on fixed incomes particularly. I agree with some of what Nikki said there. As she mentioned, Labor did raise job seeker allowance in the 2023-24 budget. We've also, again, a little bit like the previous question, trying to help people manage these pressures in every single way we can. Things like the Commonwealth Rent Assistance, for example, that helps 1 million households around the country, has gone up by 45% since we've been in government. We talked about energy bill price relief. We talked about some of these other issues. So I know none of this takes the pain away, but please understand, every budget we come to, we are absolutely trying to find every single way that we can help people relieve pressures.
Sally?
Well, I agree, but then I've sat there in Parliament and I've watched time and time again at each budget. It's a question of priorities, and the government of the day has to decide who they're prioritising, who they're going to help, who they're not going to help. And Marge, I know so many people on pensions are doing it incredibly tough. Those on job seeker, even worse, because that hasn't even increased. And yet there's no willingness yet to look at changing some of the rules. For example, we talk about housing supply being so incredibly short, but there's no willingness to look at changing the rules around, for example, better utilisation of current supply, having incentives, helping pensioners earn additional income without risking their pensions, for example. So why not allowing greater thresholds when it comes to work or renting rooms, having ways to supplement that income without impacting pensions to actually help deliver solutions across a number of problems. I still feel there isn't a willingness always from government to help those that are the most vulnerable in our communities, especially when I think of job seeker and I think of women in particular, women especially if they're escaping domestic violence, they have a choice of homelessness, poverty or violence.
Well, we've had women on the show who just want to get jobs but can't get them. Michael, actually, in the past, a woman who came and spoke powerfully, lives on job seeker. She wants a job, but she faces age discrimination. Is it worth looking at?
Well, we're seeing a few things going on at the moment. I think for the first time that I find quite depressing, I think the concept of the working poor has arrived in our country in the last few years, where we've got people who are literally working full-time, to use the phrase that someone mentioned earlier, has done everything right, worked really hard, and yet they're sleeping in their car. Now, Claire and I, we are from parties of government, so there's always difficult issues to manage and to juggle. And I know that when we were in government, I was Assistant Treasurer, we had the single biggest increase to JobSeeker. We supported the government's subsequent increases to JobSeeker, and I do genuinely think that all people in government look at every opportunity to increase those payments, but we also have to think about, and the Coalition in particular, think about the people that we would be asking to tax more in order to increase those payments. Where I very much disagree with Richard is we don't have an income problem. We've had, in the last 3 years, an extra $425 billion spent. $425 billion. So the budget now is $425 billion bigger than the last coalition budget. That suggests to me that there's not a shortage of revenue coming to government, but government's spending too much. And we have to always manage how much do we shake all of you down for more taxes versus what that can enable us as far as social benefits. Okay. But I assure you, on JobSeeker,
get in there.
I think collectively have moved the dial a long way. But is it ever?
Is there more work to do? Yes or no?
Is it ever going to be enough? No. And
is there more work to do? I'm over here, Michael. More work to do, yes or no?
Of course, there's always more work to do.
Okay. I can save you a fortune. $15 billion a year in fossil fuel subsidies. $15 billion a year. AUKUS, $360 billion. Didn't go to Treasury. Didn't go to Treasury. And when Josh Frydenberg was asked, can we afford it? He said, you can always afford it if it's a priority. He's right. He's right. We're one of the richest countries in the world. We're so rich we can drop a lazy $360 billion on some nuclear subs we didn't know we need. But sorry, unemployed people, money doesn't grow on trees, you know.
Yeah.
We're rich.
Okay. Well, our next question comes from Ashleigh Vout. Hi.
Hi. In recent days, Senator Jacinta Price made comments about making Australia great again. The media jumped on this as a correlation with Trump's Make America Great Again policy. My question is, what is actually wrong with making Australia great again?
Regina.
Well, Senator Price has said she wasn't having regard to what's happening in America when she made those comments, and I do think we should take that at face value. For my part, I actually think that we need more people like Jacinta Price in the Parliament, somebody who has endured significant domestic violence, who gave birth at 17 while completing her Year 12 assessments. She has overcome significant violence in her family. To overcome that sort of Indigenous disadvantage, I actually think they're the sorts of solutions that I would like to hear more of debate.
But do we need to make, to the question, it's not about the individual, it's about the slogan, should we make Australia great?
Look, for my part, I think if we are looking to the US for our strategic direction as a country, we've got bigger problems than a housing crisis or a cost of living crisis.
Good point, Richard.
Oh, look, I'd like to make Australia even better, whether we've been great in the past or not, but I don't know, but I want it to be a lot better in the future. I think Jacinta Price's problem is that she's been made the Minister for Doge. She's the governor, straight out of the Trump playbook, wanting to sack lots of public servants straight out of the Trump playbook. I don't mind someone wanting to make Australia great or make Australia great again, but you can't use a slogan like that, implement policies like that and be surprised that people join the dots.
Michael, just quick answer from you and Claire on this.
Well, I think, look, I don't want to sound too parochial. We are the best country, but we've always got to improve. And I think we are a wonderful country. I think, I say this as a Victorian, I think we've got bad government here in Victoria. I think we've got a bad government in Canberra. I think we could be an even better country if we were governed better. But we'll always be, in my view, the best country in the world.
So
but
are we already
always
great, Michael?
Have to improve. Of course, we're the greatest.
We'll go with that. Lots of clapping for we're the greatest, Claire.
Oh, look, again, this is so disturbing. I'm finding myself agreeing with much of what Michael said there. Look,
see, we bring people together here.
Exactly, it's a beautiful thing. I would just say, like, it is so clear to me that Australia is a better country than America, right? Like, we have a better healthcare system. We look after each other. We protect each other. We don't have those horrific problems with gun violence that so plague their society. We have an education system. We have equal opportunity. We have a country today led by a Prime Minister who grew up with a single mum with a disability in public housing. That could never happen in America, never ever. So I just think we don't need to borrow phrases and concepts and ideas. We don't need it, Australia's Elon Musk. Sorry to you, Michael, but we just don't need it. I think we've got what we need here.
Okay.
And, yeah.
Zali?
Oh, look, I think I've had the incredible privilege of representing Australia at the Olympics. Australia has incredible potential, but we are also held back. We're held back at the moment by a lot of politics and ideology from both major parties that is not embracing of all of our opportunities. We, as a continent, have an opportunity to be an absolute economy superpower driven by innovation. We're not doing it. We're still holding on to the past. The idea of going back is only embracing the problems we've had for so long. And the part I find frustrating is no one ever acknowledges their responsibility in the problems we have today. And it's not going to kill anyone politically to acknowledge that, look, over the last, for example, the coalition, over the 9 years of government, we didn't do enough on housing. Now we can do more. Or, for example, there are problems, we can do better. It's just so frustrating always to listen to the blame the other side, promise that I'm going to do it dramatically different.
All right. Well, Zali, can I just absolutely, what a flex. I've represented Australia at the Olympics. What a flex. Hats off to you.
It's a phenomenal nation.
It is, absolutely.
I'm so incredibly proud.
Thank you
have so much potential.
for everyone's participation tonight. Thanks to our panel, Zali Steggall, Rashina Campbell, Claire O'Neill, Michael Sukkar and Richard Dennis. We'll take a one-week break over Easter. We'll be back on air from Sydney on April the 28th. That's the last show before people go to the polls. Go to our website to register to be in the audience. Thanks so much for your company. I love Out of Melbourne. It's my heartland. Good night.